occasions tried to attack the Muslim from behind, and upon 3 occasions the archers repelled. And slowly the Muslims got the upper hand, and slowly the mushrikeen began to flee from the battlefield. And the archers began to dispute amongst them. Some said the command of the Prophet ﷺ was only until the battle went on, and Abdullah ibn Jubayr pleaded with them. But 40 of them left their sides, and Khalid got his opportunity. You know, Amr ibn As defined Khalid bin Waleed. He said, he is a friend of death, a master of warfare. He has the dash of a lion and the patience of a cat. And on that day, he showed the patience of a cat. He waited for his opportunity, and then he came from behind, and he attacked the 10 archers. He overpowered them. And then with the dash of a lion, he was upon the believers. And every time he would strike a Muslim, he would say, Ana Abu Sulaiman. Every single time. And the rumor spread that the Prophet ﷺ had passed away. And lots of the Muslims, they left the battlefield. And Ikramah, the son of Abu Jahl, came behind the path of the Prophet ﷺ, and he stopped the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ had 30 Sahaba with him. And the target of the mushrikeen were no other than the Prophet ﷺ. But wallahi, the only way they were going to reach the Prophet ﷺ was over the dead bodies of these 30 Sahaba. And when they attacked, the Prophet ﷺ said, who will repel them? And the first man to stand up was a Sahabi called Ziyad ibn Sakan radiyallahu anhu. An old man. He was an old man. And he said, oh, me, O Messenger of Allah. And he fought and he was struck down. When he was struck down, the Prophet ﷺ said, bring him closer to me. And when they brought Ziyad ibn Sakan, whilst his cheek was on the foot of the Prophet ﷺ, he passed away. Wallahi, what honor that you die with your cheek on the foot of your Master ﷺ. And on that day, Abu Dujana took so many arrows that when he could no longer take the pain, he stood in front of the Prophet ﷺ. And when he could no longer take the pain, he fell to the ground, and the narration mentioned that his back was like a porcupine. On that day, Abu Talha ibn Ubaydillah stood in front of the Prophet ﷺ, and he took so many arrows that his one side became paralyzed. And the Prophet ﷺ said, Ya Talha, wajibat lak. Ya Talha, wajibat lak. He said, oh Talha, today Jannah has become wajib upon you. On that day, Khalid ibn Simma stood in front of the Prophet ﷺ, and he said, Waji duna waji. He said, my face will take the arrows, but I will not allow the arrows to hit your face. He said, Nafsi duna nafsik. He said, my body will take the arrows, but I will not allow the arrows to hit your body, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And it was on that day that 70 Sahaba were martyred. And when the rumor spread that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam had passed away, when the rumor spread that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam had passed away, Khalid bin Waleed went to Abu Sufyan and he said, are you sure that Muhammad is dead? And Abu Sufyan said, yes. He said, are you not sure? And Khalid said, men like Muhammad don't die so easily. Men like Muhammad don't die so easily. And Khalid bin Waleed had seen a group of people going up the mountain Uhud, and he went to pursue them because he wanted to kill the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And Umar ibn Khattab took out his sword and he said, Khalid, come. But Khalid knew that the Muslims were on top of the mountain. It would be impossible to fight them. And it was on this day that 70 Sahaba were martyred. The beloved uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, Hamza radiallahu anhu, was not only martyred, his body was mutilated. Nowhere else in the life of the Prophet ﷺ did the Prophet ﷺ sob and cry. Besides when he saw the mutilated body of his uncle Hamza radiallahu anhu, he sobbed, he cried uncontrollably. And the man who was responsible for all this was no other than Khalid bin Waleed radiallahu anhu. The only man to defeat the army of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was Khalid bin Waleed. History records that only 2 generals never lost a battle. One was Genghis Khan and the other one was Sword of Allah, Khalid bin Waleed radiallahu anhu. The difference between the two was Genghis was a tyrant while Khalid bin Waleed was a mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Genghis Khan would say, the most beloved thing to me is to kill my enemies, to take their possession, to enjoy the pain and the suffering is to go on the path of my Lord on a cold and frosty night. Wallahi, I swear by Allah, this is more beloved to me than the first night with my wife. This is more beloved to me than the night that I have been given glad tidings of a newborn child. Why? Because he knew the words of the Prophet ﷺ. لَغَضْوَةٌ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ أَوْ رَوْحَةٌ خَيْرٌ مِنَ الدُّنْيَا وَمَا فِيهَا. A moment in the evening, a moment in the morning in the path of Allah, or a moment in the evening in the path of Allah is better than what the entire dunya holds. What the entire dunya holds. And then came the battle of Khandaq. And Khalid's duty again was to kill the Prophet ﷺ. And the Muslims, they dug the trenches. And Khalid orchestrated the movement of the Mushrikeen cavalry in such a way that the Muslims attained no rest. And two people managed to cross the trench. One was Ikramah with a group of men, and the other one was Khalid bin Waleed. And when Ikramah managed to cross the trench, with him was a man called Amr ibn Abd Wud. And Amr ibn Abd Wud was the undisputed champion amongst the Arabs. He had never lost a battle, and the narration mentioned he descended from his horse and he cut the legs of the horse, meaning that he wasn't going to go back. And then he said, "O Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, is there anybody amongst you who is ready to fight me?" And nobody moved. Why? Because this was Amr ibn Abd Wud. When women, their children wouldn't go to sleep, they would say, "Go to sleep, Amr ibn Wud is coming." He was equivalent to 500 men, and he had never spared a man who fought him. And nobody moved, and Amr ibn Abd Wud began to laugh. And the Mushrikeen began to laugh. And then he said, "Oh Muhammad, I hear that you say that your martyrs will go into Jannah and we will go into Jahannam. Is there anybody amongst you who wants to enter into Jannah?" And Ali radiallahu anhu jumped up and he said, "O Messenger of Allah, allow me to fight this tyrant." And listen to the words of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Oh, sit down, Ali. Don't you know this is Amr? Don't you know this is Amr ibn Abd Wud?" And then Amr ibn Wud began to laugh again, and the Mushrikeen began to laugh. And then he shouted again. He said, "What about your Nabi Muhammad? And what about your deen?" And the Sahaba couldn't take this insult. And Ali radiallahu anhu said, "O Messenger of Allah, allow me to go and fight him." And the Messenger of Allah allowed him. And the Prophet ﷺ took off his turban and he placed it on the head of Ali radiallahu anhu. And he gave him his sword, Zulfiqar. And then the Prophet ﷺ lifted his hands to the heaven. And he said, "Oh Allah, on the day of Uhud, you took Hamza away from me. Today, do not take Ali away from me." And Ali marched out, and really, it was a mismatch like David and Goliath. And when Amr ibn Abd Wud saw Ali, he said, "Couldn't they find anybody who was bigger than you? He was only a young man at the time." And Ali radiallahu anhu responded, he said, "I am at the lowest from amongst the believers, but you deserve nobody besides me." And then Ali radiallahu anhu said, "Before I fight you, I will give you one of two options. That you recite La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah." And Amr ibn Abd Wud said, "Even if my head was in the depths of Jahannam, I would not recite these words." And then Ali radiallahu anhu said, "You go back, don't fight the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam." And Amr ibn Abd Wud said, "Then people will say I ran away from a small child like you." And then Amr asked him, "Who are you?" He said, "I'm Ali, the son of Abu Talib." And Amr said, "Your father was my friend. My son, I don't want to kill you." And Ali radiallahu anhu said, "You may not want to kill me, but because you are the enemy of Allah, I want to kill you." And this enraged Amr, and he went for Ali radiallahu anhu. And Ali was very nimble, and he moved from one side to the other side until Amr was totally exhausted. And Allah had given Ali great power, great natural power, even in the battle of Khaybar. He dislodged the whole door, and he jumped towards